Behind every silence, there is a story of survival waiting to be told. Stories hidden in plain sight. Truth buried beneath fear. This is the Maxwell Matewere podcast, unmasking the truth, revealing the crime, and giving a voice to the voiceless. Investigative discussions, insightful, thought-driven. The podcast that reinforces authority and human rights mission. Real stories, real investigations, real impact. Stay tuned.
Imagine a loved one, a colleague, someone that you've brushed shoulders with, who all of a sudden goes missing, and they have been lured into the web of human trafficking. They're here today and you never see them again. Or you find them, but not in the best state possible. We are starting the series of discussions today based on this absolutely gripping book called Human Trafficking Exposed that has been authored by Maxwell Matewere. This book can be purchased on Amazon, but also Barnes & Noble. And this book is captivating, it is thought-provoking, it is heart-wrenching, but it is a reality. There's so many people who have lived this grueling, this scary reality of human trafficking. And today I'm going to speak to my first guest, and this is Habiba Osman. Welcome, Habiba.
Thank you very much, Hazel.
Thank you. These are real lives, real people. This is the Maxwell Matewere podcast, and I am your host, Hazel Shitulu. Habiba, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
How are you?
I'm absolutely fine. Brilliant. And also very honored to be the first guest.
Wow.
Yes, on this podcast.
You look beautiful.
Thank you very much.
I love your dress.
Thank you.
Habiba, not the easiest conversation to have, but very relevant. Human trafficking has become so rampant. Even here in Malawi, we're hearing stories nearly every day of people that have gone missing, children. Some of them are never found. So today we're starting that discussion. But before we plunge into that, let's talk about you. Who is Habiba?
Well, Habiba is a woman,
yes,
of course, who is a human rights defender,
right,
as well as an activist. But throughout my life, I've really journeyed into human rights matters, particularly interested in issues of human trafficking. And if you look at my track record, for example, you'll note that I am very much aware of the author because I consider him as a mentor.
Right.
And actually my first job that I got in terms of, fighting against human trafficking, he was my referee, but also he mentored me to get my first job as a program coordinator for the Norwegian Church Aid here in Malawi. So basically, if you follow the trajectory of my work, I've worked for a local NGO where I was also familiar with Max because he was the one who started the network on child trafficking. Basically, it was to bring all stakeholders in Malawi. So I was a young woman, working and volunteering for a local organization called CILIC, and that's where I could be found in the local network. And then after that, I really cast my net wider, and then I got employed by the Norwegian Church Aid, and which was also, I would say, the first international NGO to concentrate on issues of human trafficking in Malawi. Thereafter, I worked for the UN, and then now I'm heading the Human Rights Commission as I sit here today. So basically, if you see, I've been an advocate on human rights, but trafficking really is one of the areas that I've specialized in. I even have my master's in issues to do with human trafficking.
Right.
Yeah.
Habiba, you're still a young woman. You said I was young then. You're still young. You're still young.
Younger, maybe.
You're still young.
Yeah, maybe younger, in my 20s. So that tells you.
Spring chicken.
Yes.
Habiba, obviously you have achieved so much in your career. You've received many accolades. And one of the things that actually comes up when you looked up, I'll confess that I did look you up on the internet. One of the things that came up was that you received an award in recognition of your work in human rights trafficking. And this achievement was given by the Office of the Ombudsman, recognizing you as one of Malawi's top 100 women in line doing this work of in connection with human trafficking, but what really stands out for you out of all of the things that you've done, which might be something difficult to pick out because I know you've done a lot of work, but is there one particular accolade or word or work that stands out for you in the work that you've done so far?
So I would say, again, making reference to the contribution towards the fight against human trafficking, my one standout issue, which I would really like to always go back to, is the fact that, I was also one of the young women who was really drafted into the Special Law Commission to draft the anti-trafficking law, which started in 2007 and the process finished around 2014. So I am proud of that achievement, because now when you look at the first trafficking law that was enacted in this country, you see my footprint in there amongst other, eminent people that were part and parcel of that Special Law Commission. And Max was also in that Special Law Commission. Yeah. So rubbing shoulders with those that, have come before you, the advocates, but also the ones who set the ground, really is a great achievement for me if I look back.
Brilliant. I'm sure we could talk all day about your achievements, but that's another podcast altogether. Habiba, as someone working for the Human Rights Commission, you must be celebrating the recent UN resolution that named slave trade as one of the gravest crimes against humanity. What is it all about?
Well, I would say that, when we look at human trafficking as it is right now, it has become more sophisticated with technology, etc. But when we look at the trends, or when we look at the genesis of human trafficking, the Atlantic slave trade in our history books or in our law books, this is where it started, people selling people and people leaving their country and, all the elements of human trafficking. But then you would argue that, that form of human trafficking was, widely known or widely seen. It was public. And so I would also say that it sets the tone about human trafficking. But again, we see the trajectory, how human trafficking has evolved over a period of time. And for us here in Africa, as the victims, our ancestors or, our relatives who were taken years and years ago, it is pivotal for us to celebrate this UN resolution. I do know that it has also rubbed others in the wrong way, a few, but the fact that it was widely endorsed, that was a form of slave trade, or that was a form of the old trafficking, not as it is now, that modern day trafficking, should speak volumes about how relevant this topic is, but also how gripping it has been for us as a continent.
Right, we've spoken about slave trade.
Yes.
Now, I think for a lot of us, when we think or talk about slave trade, we are taken back to the time when, people used to be taken as actual slaves.
Yes,
and
in chains.
In chains, correct. But moving forward to 2026, the statistics are showing us that 1 in every 150 people on Earth are currently trapped in modern slavery. Yeah? What does that actually look like? Because maybe when we think about, we might be staring human trafficking in the face and not even recognize it.
Yeah.
Because our minds are still where slave trade or trafficking had a certain image.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're looking for. So even if it's staring us in the face, my apologies, we might not even know it.
Yeah.
We might not recognize it. But
Yes.
what does it actually look like today?
Well, I would say, just going back to what I said earlier, that, the slave trade was public because people would be auctioned, people would be taken onto ships, and, people would be in actual chains. As you've seen history books, I'm sure you and I were not born yet, but we know the actual pictures, we've seen movies. But when you look at that's why they're calling it modern day slavery, with the fact that, it has evolved over time. And yes, indeed, you may not even be able to see it actually or physically, that, people are moving in chains, because the recruitment methods have changed. The transportation methods have changed. People may not even be transported because, now it's like the forms of trafficking that have come over the years. You'd see people being trafficked through the internet, through a phone call, people are being trafficked. Maybe their body organs are being trafficked. So not the actual person. And, there's also this new form where, child marriage, it's like child marriage, but it's a form of trafficking. So it has taken various forms.
Right.
So the issue is to be alert and to be able to understand that, trafficking has evolved. And also the people who are involved in this crime or in this business have also used different tactics. Right. And they always say that, they are using sophisticated methods to traffic their victims or to traffic those that they, have targets on. So this is why we're saying that it's different nowadays. So basically, a child can be trafficked from their home in the confines of their room is because they're on the phone, and then someone traffics them, or they give them details. You can come here, we'll take you somewhere, etc. So again, it's also sort of like become individualized to a certain extent. So that's the difference, where you would see that the slave traders would take maybe people as a group, but now you can even be trafficked as an individual. You can be trafficked as a group. So again, as you see that the modus operandi of trafficking has really evolved over time.
Right. So we were talking about children. You've raised a very important point. Speaking of children, there's been a well-documented report by the Malawi Human Rights Commission that was published last year, 2025, on 27th of June to be precise. And it highlights a sharp increase of intercountry adoptions, indicating that close to 400 children, that's a large number, cannot be traced in the system. They were taken out of the country between 2017 and 2024 through illegal adoptions, and they cannot be traced. How is this possible?
First, let me just state that it's very alarming.
Right.
It's very alarming, and it's horrific, to be honest, if I have to be blunt. It is possible that, yes, these things are happening in our country simply because our system is not designed to trace, also to protect, but also to really detect, what is happening. This is due to a number of factors. So I would also want to put it out that, for example, just the fact that, we have, we call them CCI, children centers where, you have children being kept, or you have orphanages. The regulatory framework in this country is very weak. And when I say that, someone would be shocked to note that, for example, our adoption law is 80 years old, meaning that it needs reform. And 80 years old, that's a long time. It was done in 1948. So that already speaks volumes to the fact that, our regulatory framework is weak. We have a system that is not coordinated. So, for example, in this particular instance, what was shocking for us was to find that the CCIs, the centers where these children are kept, as well as the Ministry of Gender that is responsible for understanding issues of adoption, the District Social Welfare Office, as well as the Child Case Review Board, there is this lack of coordination. They have data, but everyone is keeping their own data. And there is no central portal or central management system that really showcases how many children we have. And coupled with the fact that, again, it's, people have realized that this is a business. Right. So again, there are undocumented children that are being let out or let off. And in a way that people are gaining money profit, you find that, there's a chain that sometimes may not even use the right channels, the court process. So this is something that was shocking for the Human Rights Commission, but alarming with the fact that because we are not able to detect because of weak laws enforcement, no proper records for, tracking and also seeing, the adoption levels. But again, also I would say enabled by issues of corruption, because again, that is also a key issue. That is very prevalent in our country.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that gap, the issue that is at hand, is the Human Rights Commission working with any organizations or any groupings to be able to curb this problem?
So in practical terms, our role as a commission is preventative,
Right.
investigative, advocacy, and accountability role, specifically in the adoption system. So when it comes to prevention strategies that we're using, we are working a lot with key stakeholders. Being a constitutional body, our mandate is that we investigate allegations where allegations have been leveled on illegal adoption. So we would investigate. So complaints can come from parents, they can come from guardians, civil society at large, as well as sometimes directly from the courts. So just like last year in 2025, the court in Blantyre directed the Human Rights Commission to investigate specific adoption cases, and we submitted 2 reports to the High Court to enable it to make its judicial decisions. So our role is very pivotal in that we do work at preventing, but while we're doing that, the first thing that we're supposed to do as a commission, where we've received complaints or cases, is to investigate. And that's a constitutional mandate that we have been given. And beyond that, we are also monitoring how these state agencies, as well as the orphanages and places that are keeping children, are operating and if they're regulated. So we also go in to sort of like do a blitz, check sports. We do that, but more importantly, it's also for accountability, so that whatever we find, we can also compile that and, bring stakeholders together and address these issues and the gaps. But also, in a way, it's for us to contribute to the research around the area, which can inform policy and legal reform.
Right. So you spoke about something prior to this question.
Yeah.
You spoke about something very interesting. We can be trafficked as groupings,
Yeah.
but also as individuals.
Yes.
And you give a perfect example of a child being trafficked. They're sitting in their room on their gadget,
Yeah.
which is very common these days.
Absolutely.
So in terms of awareness, are we aware enough? Are we, as the parents are raising their are they aware that this can happen when the child is sitting in your home? Because that's how serious this is. Because most of the times when we think about trafficking, we're thinking about the child was walking home from school.
Yes.
And somebody parked on
Pulled
the
out
side
the car.
and they grabbed them and then you can't find them. But this child could be sitting in their room, speaking to somebody you don't know,
Yeah.
right under your nose, and they're being groomed and they're
Absolutely.
trafficked. Are we aware enough? Are we educated enough?
I would say, I like the fact that you say, are we educated enough? I would say a little bit,
Right.
not too much. Because in this particular case that we've talked about, it's like you find now that, parents have let go, they are giving their children phones. And, you and I cannot control, even the police cannot control what's happening in the home, in the confines of the home.
Right.
So it is very difficult. But again, I would say that I believe from, let's say, 2006, when the trafficking conversation was happening in this country, there was a lot of awareness that led to the advocacy to come up with the law. But beyond that, I think now the preventative methods could be the ones that are also difficult. So in this particular instance, where parents are now giving their children smartphones, it's very difficult to really track and trace what these children are watching, especially if you don't put maybe parental controls even on TV. So I would say we are not educated to that level yet, particularly also if you see even the response towards trafficking. For example, if we say MACRA, which is the regulatory body that really looks at social media and also the phones and whatever, as well as the private sector that is working, like Airtel and others. I've not seen yet programming that talks about trafficking in persons comprehensively. I'm yet to see that. And I think it should be a responsibility even for those who are working in the private sector,
Right.
even MACRA itself, to take initiative around these issues. But I can hardly point out to a time where MACRA, for example, held a national conference on human trafficking, which is a very important area when it comes to issues of technology, etc. So what is happening with the technology, how the technology is being used, and also just do not think about even those that have technology, but what about those that do not even have technology in the rural areas? I mean, there are cases, for example, in Mangochi, where I went to a village, we were doing something totally different, but then we were interested to find out how many people are being trafficked in this particular village.
Right.
So it was so shocking to hear that, oh, the village had a lot of women, young women, even mothers and grandmothers. And they said, oh, in this village, we don't have a lot of young men and boys. So we asked, like, what is the problem? He says, no, because when they receive the phones, their cousins or their friends send them smartphones from South Africa.
Right.
And most of them are being recruited to go and work in South Africa.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And so it's very interesting also the power of the phone, what it can do in someone's hand. So we were wondering, like, how are they being recruited? It's like, no, because when they get the phone, they show them an amazing lifestyle that is taking place in South Africa, and they send them money. So you can also receive money for you to travel to South Africa because someone has used maybe Airtel app, etc. So they're even receiving money using the phones. And it was an eye opener for us to note that the power of technology, or technology now, is actually being used for recruiting and trafficking people.
So there is a gap. There's a lot of work.
There is a lot of work.
So Habiba, what is the risk associated with child trafficking and illegal adoption if this is not addressed?
Okay, so I would say it's not that every orphanage that we went to or that is here in Malawi is associated with trafficking. But again, I would say there are risks that, you can point out directly. So for example, a child losing their, legal identity, issues of human dignity, issues of security, issues of separation with biological parents or biological siblings, etc. So these are the risks that are associated with trafficking. But more importantly, also the issue of protection itself. Because if you note from what I had said that, Malawi, when we lose these children, through adoption, you'd find that the country also hasn't ratified the Hague Convention, the important Hague Convention that, deals with issues of child protection, but also matters related to adoption. And because of that, for example, if the children are trafficked to Brazil or South America or anywhere else in the world, because we do not have those international safeguards, it becomes really problematic for us to really note the impact that this has on our children. But again, trafficking is very brutal. We even lose lives. So children lose lives, but we lose touch, with those children. But again, the impact is so vast on the society that sometimes even the children, when they've been taken, there hasn't been consent that has been given. Just, I'll give you an example. Just 10 days ago, there was a little baby that was found in Blantyre, in one of the cities in Blantyre, in one of the townships in Blantyre. This child was taken to one of the biggest hospitals. This is a public hospital. So the lady who took the child was saying, I'm expressing an interest that I should keep this child, but I would want to do the formal processes. But because we've just picked the child from the township, the child doesn't look well, so we hope that you're going to treat the child. So she was told, yes, the child needs to go into ICU, so today you can't see the child. But 2 days later, when the lady went to check on the child just disappeared. And this is a fresh case. Wow. So again, as someone who's working from the Human Rights Commission, I'm saying, how safe is the system? That if they abandon children, for example, they're missing at the big public institution like a hospital. How many have missed? That we haven't accounted for. But this case is there because someone reported to the Human Rights Commission. So just to give you the consequences and the impact on that particular case is that, that child, it means, has lost identity. We don't know where that child is. Is the child alive? That is another question. Is the child being sold? We don't even know. But where is that child? That is a question that we have.
So really the problem is vast.
Very.
Very vast.
And it's deep.
And it's deep. Because while we're looking at the illegal adoptions where children are taken to a registered orphanage, the flip side of the coin is we have hospitals who can take in a child, in this case, for example, in this case, who is so small, they don't even have a name yet. They haven't gone there with the parents. They've been taken there by a stranger and they've gone missing. So this is deep. And this clearly calls for action, because it's so wide open and so vast, and the problem is so deep.
Yes, even at the point where, for example, people are giving birth, to children in unconventional ways, it means those children are in danger. Yes. Because in this particular instance where a mother has abandoned that child can be subject to, traffickers trafficking that child, or, so we shouldn't even be putting adoption maybe as something that comes first, but trafficking. So that there's a sector, or there are children that are born in this country that are being abandoned, and those are the first ones really to be victims of trafficking, because the protection mechanisms are not even there to protect those ones that, let's say, are born outside the hospitals, etc., or the formal system. So again, that's why this book, Maxwell Matewere's book, is very critical, because it really highlights and opens the Pandora's box, or it opens really a can of worms around issues of adoption and how that is linked to trafficking in persons. So it's very critical, and I would say that it also is very easy for us to now understand the forms of trafficking with the way the book really articulates, with the way Max really articulates the forms of trafficking, which I'm happy to note that adoption has also been picked as a central theme in the book.
We've learned about the different faces of human trafficking, the different techniques that have been used. Clearly, it's not just what we know. It's not the orthodox way, the conventional way that we used to understand human trafficking. But this book opens up so much. You can learn so much, and we need to be educated. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
Behind every silence, there is a story of survival waiting to be told. Stories hidden in plain sight. Truth buried beneath fear. This is the Maxwell Matewere podcast, unmasking the truth, revealing the crime, and giving a voice to the voiceless. Investigative discussions, insightful, thought-driven. The podcast that reinforces authority and human rights mission. Real stories, real investigations, real impact. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Maxwell Matewere podcast. We are discussing human trafficking, and we're going to be talking about the book that Maxwell Matewere authored, and it's called Human Trafficking Exposed. Uncovering human trafficking. What is human trafficking? How well and how much do we know about human trafficking? Are we well educated about it? This book talks about so much on that topic of human trafficking. The root causes. What causes human trafficking? How can someone be trafficked? Children, adults, men and women, people who should know better, but it can happen to anyone. Habiba, we briefly spoke about the book.
Yeah.
I assume that you've read it. It's gripping. I couldn't put it down from the moment that I got it. It's shocking to see that this is real life. These things are actually, and this book is so relevant and so in touch with the subject that it's not just statistics. It goes beyond that, because these are real stories,
yes,
real people. It's not fiction.
Yeah.
This book has stories of people who actually went through this, people who have been rescued from situations where they were trafficked. So having read this book, all of the chapters are relevant, but chapter 5 speaks specifically about a topic that we touched on, children being trafficked through illegal adoptions from children's homes.
Yeah.
And this problem is being addressed by the Human Rights Commission. But do you think that people are, especially in the rural areas, where adoption might, or rather where taking their children to a home might be a real option because they can't look after the child. Maybe they are economically challenged. Are they well educated? Are they well aware of this problem?
So I would say that, as I said to you earlier, that Malawi really started having, this narrative about human trafficking around, 2005, 2006. And I'm not surprised that, Maxwell has been able to produce such, a scientific evidence, through this book of human trafficking. It's because of his experience,
Right.
being one of the first advocates in this country to introduce the topic of human trafficking through his work with Eye of the Child, but also beyond the work that he was doing, leading, particularly the Anti-Trafficking Child Network, which was set up specifically to address issues of child trafficking then, which later on actually went on to embrace that there are other forms of trafficking. So it became an important big network that was addressing other forms of trafficking,
Right.
the Malawi network, against human trafficking. So it became that, it morphed into that. That said, I would say that I would want to give credit to the advocates and to those people who were lobbying, the grassroots, organizations that were part of the network. Their role really was to raise awareness.
Right.
Again, I think if you note everywhere else, anywhere else, to have campaigns, it's very costly.
Yes.
So, yes, they may have been able to use the means that were there, but over time, with the progression, with the transformation of human trafficking, its methodology, and also the modus of operandi, you would note that it requires different methodologies of awareness, prevention, response. And so to say that we have fully managed to educate the masses, I would say to some extent we have, but then again, there are also some aggravating factors that still make trafficking thrive. So, for example, the levels of poverty in this country.
Yes.
So those people that you're talking about in the rural areas, if they're poverty-stricken and someone tells them that, well, if we take your sons and daughters to go to Zambia or to go to India or Oman, you'll be getting money in US dollars. That is attractive, considering also that, the poverty problem is so entrenched in Malawi. And then you have issues of high unemployment levels. And then you also have, masses that are still illiterate. So again, it is very easy to deceive, folks, to deceive parents, but also to deceive, the youth, that are looking for something. Just recently, you've heard about, the youth going to Israel, the youth fighting to go to Israel in this country. Those are high levels of employment that are causing people to say, okay, these are the push factors. We have to go somewhere to find employment. But then they can end up in vulnerable situations where they find themselves in a trafficking situation. So it's also the enabling environment that really makes it very impossible for us to say we've managed to, raise awareness to a certain level. Yes, we'll raise awareness, but if the poverty levels are still higher, then people would opt, or people would find themselves vulnerable to being trafficked.
Right. In chapter 5, it says that the process usually begins with a call for charity.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're saying. You are telling this parent, I can actually help you look after this child.
Yes.
And if they're in genuine need, in genuine lack, they're sleeping without food, they're saying, my daughter is going to have a better life, without knowing what's behind that door. So these are real issues. And chapter 2 of the book talks about the methods of human trafficking. I think you spoke about one really very recent, but also it could be a very real example of the young people that went to Israel. That's not to say that they were trafficked, but that is a possibility.
Absolutely.
They may have flown there and found that what they were promised was not what was happening, and some of them may never find their way back home again. But now, speaking about the methods of human trafficking, clearly we also spoke about it being, and it an individual or a group that could be trafficked, an individual, but also a grouping that could be trafficked. But where is a possible danger? How well can people decipher the scheme? Because the methods are so vast and so clever these days. You also spoke about the Mangochi example.
Exactly.
Technology is exciting, especially to young people. A young person in Mangochi has never had a phone, and somebody brings him a smartphone.
Yeah.
So what are the possible dangers, and how can people decipher the scheme? I know it is a vast question, and maybe it's not a one answer question, but where do we begin? How can people begin to see that, there could be a possible scheme at play here?
So I would say what this book has done is to really expose, the methods that, it starts from, recruitment, because there's some enabling factors. It starts from recruitment and then people being transported, and then it ends up into a situation of exploitation.
Yes.
So interestingly, when you study trafficking and you study the events, you find that maybe someone may just contribute towards the recruitment process, but they will not be part and parcel of the whole chain.
So it's a chain, yes.
Yes, it's a chain.
Yes.
So the others will possibly contribute towards the recruitment, like parents or relatives, as the book has shown, that, someone comes, like there's a specific case that, Maxwell touches upon, where a girl is in school, she's playing netball, and then someone comes and says, oh, well, I want to take you to town
because you're so talented.
Exactly.
Yes.
We want to go and buy you school uniforms, but also want to go and sponsor you to go into a better school, etc. They take that girl, and she ends up in a situation of trafficking because she gets married off, or she gets abused by someone who's related to that particular person who trafficked. So in that particular case, how does one detect? The parents, because they are poor and they have this talented girl, someone has come and spotted their talent, they would not know, because it will start as a genuine, interest.
Right.
Even the girl herself would not know that, I'll end up in this situation. And sadly, where it's even difficult to decipher, it's when relatives facilitate the process. So, the instances where we are warned in this book, where uncles, who are living in the cities, are calling back home to say, bring so-and-so, the 13-year-old, we'll take her to school, we'll help her. And then the same uncles are acting as agents,
right.
Giving that girl to somebody else. The book has it all. Yes. So at that point, that's when it becomes very difficult to cipher, very difficult to decode, especially if it's now enabled by family members. So again, this book, I think, is helping us to understand that we must not trust anyone and everyone.
Anyone, really. Yes.
Just easily like that.
Yes.
So that's what I like about the book, because it's also helping us show that it's even family members that are involved in this.
Yes.
But even the family members, sometimes it could be even duty bearers. Like, for example, in the case I was giving you about groups being trafficked,
yes.
there is a case that is reported, I think in 2013, when I was at Norwegian Church Aid, for example, where people went to visit a chief, and the chief, facilitated, they gave names, I think, of 21 children, or there were 19 children or 19 people who were trafficked, even with their parents. So parents and children went to Mozambique, but the consent was given by the chiefs. Again, that also tells you that it can be even enabled or facilitated by duty bearers themselves. So this is a case of a rural area, where you have it in the rural area. Again, this is where it also becomes complicated to decode. What we can hope in terms of addressing it would be really continuous messaging, but also making sure that you have people that are aware that this is trafficking, because it is very difficult to note it or to detect, or even to think that, oh, my daughter is going to be trafficked, when it's an uncle or when it's my older brother who lives in the city. I live in the village. I'm a single mother. I can't take care of my children. I've got 7 girls. So I want them to have a good education. My brother lives in town, but in a way, he has called for them. Let me send them. You will not know in this particular case that they are going to end up in situations of exploitation.
So really, we are to be very alert and very aware. And I know it may sound off to say, don't trust anybody, but really, it might have to get done. Don't really trust anybody.
Absolutely.
Because, like, for example, in the rural areas, what the chief says carries a lot of weight.
Yes.
But people need to know that even the chief cannot be trusted to a certain extent, because people have been trafficked using that route. The book discusses human trafficking as an organized crime. So you mentioned it's a chain. It's not one person funding all of the activity. One person can just facilitate the movement of people from here to the next town, for example, from Lilongwe to Blantyre. And then there's another person who's doing another thing. And it's a chain that obviously there's so many people that are involved to be able to carry out this crime. And this book also touches on that, especially in chapter 2. And the book also talks about how there are different forms and different reasons why people are trafficked. Yeah, for example, we've spoken about some of the reasons could be unemployment, could be poverty. Do you think, I think this might be a bit of a rhetorical question, but does Maxwell, does it justice? Does it provide enough information on the topic of human trafficking? I know that it's not exhaustive. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But it clearly opens the door to the conversation. But do you think that Maxwell does this justice, but also is also justified to look at human trafficking in this manner?
Absolutely. I would say 100%. The title, and when you read each and every chapter, it's really human trafficking exposed.
Right.
And what I like about this book, more importantly, when you look at the contents, Maxwell has made it easier to even give the definitions, the trafficking process, the root causes, up to the point where there are unsuspecting victims, like we said, we've spoken, including the prosecutions and convictions. But again, if you look at how it starts and the forms of trafficking and the processes, he's really given very important cases. And also because the cases are real, and as any good author would do in terms of safeguarding, he's not given the real names or faces, etc. But the book, really, the stories that he has captured are real lived in stories. So even the examples I was giving you, they are resonating with the book, with the book's themes. And more importantly, what I also find that this book is going to be very important for students, very important for laypersons, very important for prosecutors, very important for judges, and even some of us as advocates, because still people, may not realize that, people can be trafficked for organ purposes. People may be trafficked, and that there's a link. There's a very important link between illegal adoption and child trafficking. I love the way he has linked that, because it speaks to the work that the Commission is doing right now. So really, he has managed to expose trafficking, but I think I also like the simplicity of this book, because even a lay person who really doesn't know about trafficking, and that, oh, really? So you can be trafficked if, for example, you're a child, for the purposes of child marriage, they'll be able to get all that in. So I think what is now important with these stories of exploitation and survival, the next thing that I would love to see from Maxwell or from others is that we take this book and we now translate it into the vernacular. Because these are
very important.
Real lived-in stories. And if we translate it into the vernacular, the way it's been written, it's going to educate a lot of masses.
So, you've touched on something very important. It's relatable. I think that's what I was. It's relatable.
Relatable.
It is relatable.
Very.
You can almost touch it. It's real. There are some books that you read but this is real life. These are real people, and these are everyday situations. As you said, some people might not even realize they're being trafficked. So it's important. Yes, it's a very important point that this book should be, translated to Chichewa so that people can actually.
And I've liked, because he has even touched other themes. For example, the like refugees can be trafficked. So even some people living in the camp will be able to benefit, to understand. And actually, we have trafficking that's happening. Actually, right now, the levels, the numbers of trafficking of refugees are so high, at an all-time high. We have a project at the Commission. So I was glad to see that topic is included in the book, because it will also help us, but also help those that we are educating within the camps.
I think another important theme that runs through the book is that just because someone is vulnerable
Yeah.
it does not mean it is okay to be taken advantage of, because
Yes.
maybe some people are falling, not even maybe, but most of them are falling into the trap because of their state of vulnerability. For example, in chapter 11, when he's talking about trafficking of refugees, he says because of their irregular status,
Yeah.
desperate situation, and lack of awareness of local language and customs, refugees and migrants have created favorable conditions for criminal networks. So people take advantage of the fact that, you know, they're not from here.
Yeah.
They don't understand the language,
Yeah.
and they're desperate.
Yeah.
So people need to be educated to know that just because I'm a refugee, just because I'm vulnerable, it does not make it okay
Absolutely.
for somebody to take advantage of me.
Yes.
Some of the stories were difficult to read. Very difficult to read, very difficult to digest, because you wouldn't want anybody to go through that.
No.
So how did the book impact you? How did you feel? Difficult question, but yes, how did you feel?
So it took
It triggers a lot.
Yes, it triggers a lot.
Yes.
It took me back to the time that I started really being very serious about human trafficking,
Right.
and even having that interest to, go and do my master's in the US, to actually choose a topic on trafficking. That was around 2010. And now to actually read this book, fast forward 2026, you're like, oh my God, these things are still happening. But they're lived in experience. So you become so engrossed in the book that you become part and parcel of, of the events that are taking place. Because some of us have experienced these issues firsthand. Some of us are working in these issues until today. So you would think that, all the work that we've put in, all the work that Maxwell put in, before writing this book, you would think that, would have reached a certain level where you would say, okay, fine, I'm comfortable.
Yes.
Trafficking is not happening.
Yes.
But no.
The work has been done.
The work has been done.
Yeah.
So you can actually tell that this book is actually reminding us not to relax,
Not to rest.
but to also keep on, taking the issues head on. But again, it's also like a refresher for someone like me who's been in the space, but now I find myself in the broader human rights space. We tend to sometimes say, oh, well, we'll not look at trafficking today, we'll look at other issues today, but it's reminding us that, hello, this is a topic that,
Don't sit on this, yeah.
needs to be top 5 in the priority areas that the Commission is doing.
I think when you're living your life on a day-to-day basis, sometimes you forget these things are happening.
Absolutely.
Because you're living in your own cocoon.
Absolutely.
Where everything's perfect.
Yes.
It's a utopia, but somebody right now is sort of in this, if you could call it someone is in the process of being trafficked.
Yeah.
And they're none the wiser.
As we speak right now, as we have this podcast right now,
there's
some people
somebody
are being trafficked.
being recruited. There's someone somewhere who's being groomed.
Yeah.
And there are people sitting behind it knowing this is what we're doing and
Yeah.
we're moving from point A to point B. And the victim is none the wiser. They know nothing about this. They're clueless. So as you've rightly said, this has to be priority.
Yeah.
And not just for an organized space like the Human Rights Commission, but even on an individual level. Churches, yes. Sometimes we see strange activity and we sort of sometimes just turn away and say, oh, well, maybe that's how it's supposed to be.
It's normal.
Maybe this is normal.
Yeah.
But even down to individuals, we need to be alert.
Absolutely.
It opens up the very relevant conversation that everybody should be involved in.
And I believe that this book will do so well, like in schools,
Yes.
high schools,
Yes.
even primary schools,
Yes.
where we're talking about parents don't know, but even having this conversation, in primary schools or
Yes.
having them at high school,
earlier the better.
universities,
Yeah.
the earlier the better. And I think we really need this book at this particular time, where, as we're saying that, trafficking methods are, they continuously
They're getting more advanced as well.
advanced and
Yeah.
evolve. So this book really has come in also at a timely time here in Malawi.
Was there one particular chapter that jumped out at you or that stood out?
I would say all of them, to be honest. I would say
Yes.
all of them. As I've said, I think, how it is that, I'll digress a little bit. You have songs, right?
Yes.
New songs that are coming in. But you always go back to the old school, right? So again, I think each chapter, you can't really select, because if you see the interlinkages, the interconnectedness. And this is what I like about this book. But more importantly, I think what stood out for me is the fact that he's used real cases. He's used real events, experiences that those that know trafficking interventions can relate and say, oh, well, this is indeed true. This is what we are encountering. So it's also a reminder to us practitioners and also to those that are interested in working in this area or in this area to note that, when we're looking at this, we are not looking at the issues from a theoretical perspective,
or from practical,
from practical experience.
Yes.
And what can we do? And so this book really, takes us into that space and also shows us the victims, the exploitation, the cases of survival that are there. Because again, yes, it's gripping, it's sad, but I also like the fact that he has also exposed instances in these books where there is a glimmer of hope. So, for example, where, the girl has been rescued.
Yes.
Those are important cases.
Home, yes.
So we must celebrate that, those bits also in this book that have been exposed.
Would you read it again?
Oh, yeah. It's not even about reading. We'll use it for work. We'll use it for work. Yes. So definitely, we have people, we want to train people because we're training people all the time, or people going into the field, meeting people. We'll just open the chapter on organ, remove and say, colleagues, this is it.
This is it.
We'll even use the cases that have been given, as case studies. So definitely this is a go-to book for issues of human trafficking.
So this is more than just about knowledge.
Exactly. It goes beyond.
It will teach, it
Absolutely.
will educate, it will raise awareness.
Yes.
And a lot of people benefit from this.
I believe so, 100%.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a reason why I'm still insisting that, Max has done a great job.
Right.
And for me, the review that I would want to give is that let's try to get copies in the vernacular languages as well, because it will benefit us. But I don't think only us as in Malawi, but even those that are abroad, they will resonate with this. So if you're working in Zimbabwe, you will understand these stories.
Yes.
If you're working in South Africa, you will understand. If you're in Australia and also want to understand the forms of trafficking, which are also happening elsewhere, this book is very key. So it's not only addressing the context of trafficking in Malawi, fine, it's using the real life cases, but many other countries or many other advocates or those that are working in this space will resonate with the themes in this book.
So this goes beyond the borders. I know that we've sort of dwelt quite a lot on the rural areas, but really it is a global problem.
No, it is a global problem. It is a phenomenal problem.
Yes.
A crime that, usually they usually quote that this is a crime that must shame us all, or a crime that shames us all. Truly, these stories of exploitation and survival have been experienced elsewhere. We're talking now, which I don't want to delve into, the Epstein files, for example.
Yes,
there are cases of trafficking that are coming up, and you'd see women being trafficked from Australia, from South Africa. These are cases that are similar, and they are forms of human trafficking that we can resonate and connect.
Thank you so much, Habiba. This conversation is just the tip of the iceberg. I hope we have another opportunity to speak, because a lot of people could benefit from this.
Thank you.
So, human trafficking exposed. If there's a book you should read in 2026, this should be on your reading list for so many reasons. You will be educated on what human trafficking is. The question should be, do we know enough about human trafficking? Do we even know what human trafficking is? For parents, do we know who our children are speaking to? But even as an adult, do you know who you're involved with? So Human Trafficking Exposed touches on so many things that will open doors to necessary and relevant conversations that could actually save someone's life. Because in as much as some people come back home, some don't. We've spoken about human trafficking for so many things, for prostitution, for organ cultivation. Some people don't come back home alive, and it could save a life just by knowing that this is how the scheme works. This is how it can break the chain. This is how it can raise the alarm. So if there's a book that you should read this year, this should be on your reading list. Real lives, real people, real stories. This is the Maxwell Matewere podcast.
In a world of chaos, where everything's insane, there's a glimmer of hope that still remains. Through the eyes of a child, we can find our way to a brighter future, a brand new day. With the red cord outreach, we're reaching out, bringing love and support. There's no doubt. Empowerment, resource.